Good evening, members. It's 7 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Welcome to this meeting of the Strongall Council Select Committee on the 26th of September. I'm Councillor Jamie McIver. I'll be the chairman of this meeting. And I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing or by another use by such third parties. If you are seated in the lower public seating area, it is likely that the recording cameras will capture your image, and this will result in a possibility that your image will become part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should move to the upper public gallery. And also I'd like to take this opportunity to wish the Jewish community here in Epping Forest a very happy, sweet New Year. And I hope everybody's enjoying their celebrations so far. Item 2, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from absence received from Councillor Rackham, Councillor Brooks, and for lateness for this meeting, John Whitehouse and Councillor Patel.
Thank you. Item 3, substitute members.
I have been advised that there is a substitute member for Councillor Brooks, which is Councillor Wike, but I have heard no further and he hasn't turned up yet, so potentially, I thank you for the answer.
Potentially a substitute. Okay, thank you very much. Item 4, members, any declarations of interest? Councillor Bassett.
Thank you, Chairman. As a non-executive director of Qualis, I must declare that interest. It's mentioned several times in the agenda. I will not participate in the discussions on that, but I shall remain because it's just little bits.
Duly noted. Thank you very much. Any other members of interest? No? Okay, item 5. The minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy with me to sign those as a true and accurate record of the meeting? Agreed? Thank you. Item 6, our terms of reference and our work programme, which is pages 17 to 20 on your agenda. Is there anything members would like to comment on with regards to the work programme? Any matters they'd like to add to the work programme? No? Sure? Councillor Nweke, I just wanted to check there isn't any declarations of interest that you've got for the meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well then we'll move on to item 7, which is the Q1 budget monitoring reports, pages 21 to 36 of our report pack. And I believe Andrew Small will be taking us through that report.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. My colleague Chris Hargrave, who wrote this report, actually drafted a briefing note, so I feel embarrassed not to read it out, so I will read it out verbatim if that's okay with you. So, item 7, which appears on the pages 21 to 25 of your agenda this evening, sets out the Q1 position for 22-23, i.e. the forecast outcome for the 22-23 financial year, based upon available information as at the 30th of June 2022. The report covers revenue and capital positions for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account. The report, for the first time, also includes a section on the Council's funding position. This provides committee members with a greater visibility of the balance sheet impact of the financial projections and will become a standing item moving forwards. Unfortunately, it's not been a good start to the financial year, with Epping Forest District Council experiencing the same financial malaise as all other local authorities, as it tries to manage the local impact of the seemingly escalating global economic crisis. Page 23, including Appendix A on page 33, shows that the number of quite substantial financial pressures are being experienced, which are driving a forecast general fund revenue overspend of 1.196 million as at the end of June. As presented in paragraph 2.4 on page 24, spiralling inflation is having an immediate impact, especially on staffing costs in particular. The original budget assumed a 2% pay award for staff for 22-23. However, as members will know, inflation is increasing pay expectations across the private and public sector, and the Council is no different in that regard. We are now anticipating an average pay settlement of at least 5%. If this materialises, it could cost up to a further £800,000, including on-costs. But for now, there are a number of temporary staff savings, many due to vacancies, that are broadly offsetting the pressure, which helps in the short term. Although the cost pressures on staff is being generally contained for now, there are some other substantial pressures that are driving the overspend, with the delayed implementation of the local plan being the common denominator in two cases. Thus, as presented in paragraph 2.2 on page 23, the delays affecting the income from planning applications in particular, with a budget shortfall of £700,000 now anticipated. Similarly, and coincidentally in terms of magnitude, anticipated income from Qualis is also £700,000 off track, as planning delays have hampered progress on a number of key development sites. This is slowing down the drawdown of the EFDC loans Qualis, with cash flow requirements not as large as originally expected for now. There is some good news with paragraph 2.4 also showing a major positive variance on recycling, driven by an anticipated surplus of £541,000 on income received from the sale of recyclable materials due to a substantial increase in the market rate. Further details on all other significant variances are presented in paragraphs 2.2 to 2.6, and if the forecast is accurate, the deficit would need to be funded from the General Fund reserve balance, which would leave a year-end balance of just over £3 million, as presented in paragraph 2.7. This is below the Council's adopted minimum contingency balance of £4 million. The housing revenue account position is presented in paragraph 3.1 on page 27. An underspend of £1.513 million is anticipated at this stage. Although the housing revenue account is facing a lot of the same pressures as the General Fund, the need to maintain a minimum HRA balance of £2 million is reducing the ability to make capital contributions by £1.74 million, which is possibly counterintuitive, is the biggest factor behind the projected underspend. A reconciliation is presented at paragraph 3.3 on page 28. Very briefly, to finish off on capital, presented in section 4 and 5 on page 29, spending on both General Fund and the HRA capital has been subdued in Q1, with delayed drawdown of Qualis loans, as mentioned previously, being the biggest factor behind a forecast underspend of £73.1 million on the General Fund programme, and delays to the house building programme driving a forecast underspend of £21.1 million on the HRA programme. That's the end of the statement, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and I think it's worth just taking a point to recognise the excellent work that officers are doing with these constant changing financial times at the moment for matters well out of the control, mainly from of this council. And I think our officers are doing an excellent job in making sure that we, and of course our portfolio holder and cabinet team are doing an excellent job in constantly mitigating. It seems every week there's another external factor that could impact this council's finances, and I think they're doing an excellent job to keep us informed. Do any members have any comments on that particular report? Any queries? Councillor Bassett.
Thank you, Chairman. I also like to echo how difficult it must be for the finance people. Even at home, you know, you think I'm planning my budgets and it goes right out the window. Obviously, one of the big issues there is to do with planning and development. I am still not confident we know when we will get the local plan back because of the obvious impacts it has right the way through. And I'm slightly confused because they're saying the revenues are out of place because of the local plan and developers not putting it in the applications, but I'm also getting developers talking to me saying it's taking forever for the applications they've already got in to get back. So if the planning department hasn't got so much income coming or so many applications coming in, we shouldn't be seeing delays on applications that we are seeing. And I've had it, I know a lot of the other members as well have seen this. So it's the date on that. Why is there delays in applications if we're saying planning and development is not getting the applications? And also, I was listening to the Bank of England today and the markets, and they're talking on interest rates going up to 5.5%, 6%. Are we starting to put that into our planning, shall we say?
Thank you. So there's two questions there. One to do with today's announcement, and also to do with planning applications and reduced planning applications, and whether that's having an impact on length of applications. I think Councillor Phillip would like to come in.
For a start, this is a budget monitoring report. So the second question, I think that's more appropriate to take under your agenda item 8, where we're looking at the financial planning framework for the next year. And I can reassure Councillor Bassett, changes to interest rates are being factored into that. It's one of the issues we have. It's certainly not the only issue we have. We've got a big problem for next year. I know I've come to Stronger Council a number of times saying this year's budget is going to be the hardest one I've done. I thought when I moved out of the local plan arena into the finance arena, it might not be quite so difficult, but really that's frying pan to fire, I think, on this one. Who would have guessed that we've had COVID, followed by Russia invading Ukraine, followed by inflation running at the level it is? I know Bob Palmer had a crystal ball which was given to him by Sid, but I don't think even that would have picked that one up. So we are looking at it and probably take that in the financial planning framework. In terms of quarter one budget monitoring, you can understand why it's not the finance department's role to say what's happening in planning. However, there are a number of factors at play there. We know that we're working to get the final parts of the main modifications gone through again. I think that the hope is still we're looking towards the end of the year for the local plan. Whether that's going to be the actual or not, who knows? I'm not sure it's going to be the golden bullet that it would have been, say, 12 months ago. There are so many other factors affecting what's happening in the construction business at the moment. I may have mentioned 2 or 3 of them already. So I think even when we get the local plan through, we're not going to see the uptick in planning applications that we would have done normally, not least because of the uncertainty that's being factored into construction costs at the moment. As you sit in the Qualis Board, I'm sure you're well aware of what's happening there. And quite logically for most developers, if they see their profit diminishing significantly because of unexpected costs, all they do is they hold on to the land. If you're going to hold on to the land for a point, there's no point putting it in a planning application yet. I think what we have to hope is that there will be a steadying in construction prices, which takes out some of the fear factor that's in at the moment. That may then start to make building look more attractive if we get our local plan through as well. That may well impact things as well. But I don't realistically see that happening significantly in this financial year. And obviously we're baking in less optimism on the planning front for next year.
Thank you. Any other members on this particular report? Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm reading that the local plan is now to be finalised before Christmas. Now, is that solid, or is it just another kicking the can down the road, as we have been doing for the last 2 years or whatever?
Councillor Hadley, I thought I answered that one in what I've just said, in that the target is still to get it done by Christmas. Whether that is what's going to happen or not, we're, as I've said, ever since December 2017, it's not our plan at this stage. It's fully in the hands of, in our case, the multiple inspectors who've had their sticky mitts on it. And I must admit, if I had had something going on for 5 years and I still had no idea whether it was actually going to be delivered on time in my job in IBM, I'm not sure I would still have a job in IBM. However, we are still in the hands of the inspector, and we have to wait to see what happens in that.
Councillor Hadley.
Sorry for asking the question or hearing the second answer, but I would like to clarify that rather than get lost in the mist.
And do you have anything to like to add to that?
What exactly do you want clarified, Ian?
Sorry.
You've already clarified it. I'm apologising for asking you a question which you've already answered and missed a lot of other answers. Thank you.
Members, if we keep conversation through the chair, but I don't know if Andrew would like to add anything to that.
No, not really, if I'm honest. Sorry.
Thank you.
I think Councillor Phillip answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll keep everything through the chair. Any other questions on this particular report? I just wondered what we were doing to sort of maximise. I appreciate there's a lot of costs going up and up and up. I just wondered if there's anything we're doing to maximise revenues at the moment.
I think it will flow into probably to the next item when we talk about the scale of the financial challenge in next year's budget. Yeah, yes, there is work going on to make sure that we are looking at all of our current charges, but also any potential services that we're not charging for in terms of maximising our income. As I say, I mean, there are only a handful of solutions to the financial challenge that inflation and other cost pressures provide to the council. I've said before that the three solutions are probably income generation, efficiency, and beyond that, there's just reductions in service. So everything falls into that, what I picture as a triangle, and what we will be looking to do as a council, led by Cabinet, is to try and maximise income generation first and foremost, and also with a heavy focus on efficiency to prevent any reductions in service.
Thank you. And Councillor Phillip?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And again, I echo what Mr Small said, that this probably fits in the next agenda item, which is looking forward. There are limits to what we can do in terms of income generation, not least because we know of the squeeze that's on our residents. If there were things that are absolutely guaranteed to bring in money because people have got no option, unfortunately people do have an option. Even the things that they should pay, like council tax, there are people who don't pay their council tax, which is why we don't have a 100% collection record. Similarly with car parking charges and other fees that we use, we have to strike a balance between what the right level for those is. And we know that from experience, for example, when we raise car parking charges, you don't get a similar increase in your revenue from car parking. So if you put your car parking fees up by 10%, you don't get 10% additional revenue because some people stop using them. So that's a very delicate balance. We're also in the middle of the financial year, so things like fees and charges at our leisure centres, for example, they're all fixed at the moment, and we can't go around just changing them willy-nilly. It's an interesting point, but when I presented the budget back in February, that was the day that Russia invaded the Ukraine. Had we known that, we might have done things differently. But, and at the risk of not being downbeat all the time, what we have to remember is we thought we were going to be coming into this financial year with our reserves sitting around about 2.5 to 2.7 million. We were able to do significantly better last year, so that we actually came in on target with our reserves at 4 million. I would be a lot more worried if I were sitting here and we'd come in with 2.5 million. That would make it an awful lot worse situation to be in. But the rest of it, I'll wait until item 8.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I don't think you have to wait too much longer. Is there anything else on this particular report before we move on to item 8? Before we do move on, Councillor Joji, I just wanted to check there's no declaration of interest. Thank you. And Councillor Patel, of course, as well. Same. Lovely. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 8, which is the Financial Planning Framework 2023-2024 to 2027-28, which is found on pages 37 to 48 on your agenda report pack. And I'll hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, Chair, and it's almost difficult to know where to begin with this item. The three items actually on the agenda tonight all flow through into each other. They're all dealing with pretty much common issues, so that there is some repetition, I suspect. But this paper is a paper considered by Cabinet and really sets out the large financial issues that the Council will need to consider in developing its budget for 23-24. And without the risk of there's a lot of hyperbole around at the moment. This is probably one of the most challenging financial years ahead of us that will have to, or probably have had to deal with. There is an awful lot of financial pressures and issues moving around, which are fluid at the current moment in time, which makes it very difficult to try and clarify, one, what the target is for next year, and two, how the factors which are currently impacting upon it, where they will crystallise as part of budget development. So the report sets out some of the main issues that we're currently dealing with, and I don't think any of those will probably be a huge surprise to members in this room. Largely driven by global events, as we know, the energy crisis driven by the invasion of Ukraine have created a set of circumstances that we haven't seen for a very long time. Spiralling inflation, not least of those. Spiralling inflation obviously impacts upon wage demands, and we have seen already pressure in terms of demands for wage increases. Across the whole economy, that will be mirrored, obviously, in terms of wage expectations in the public sector as well. And we are tied into a wider set of national negotiations that are already increased above our current expectation for 22-23, the amount that we'll have to provide for pay. Who knows where that will be in terms of next year's budget, but obviously we can realistically expect that wage demands will be higher than the 3% that we had assumed when we put the medium-term financial plan together in February of this year. Energy costs are another significant factor, of course. Those probably not quite as susceptible to energy costs as some of the other elements that are driving the budget pressures, but still a significant factor for us in the same way it is for everybody else in all of our residents in the district. The same inflationary pressures that we're dealing with are obviously impacting upon our suppliers as well, and particularly where we have large contracts out in the market. Most of those are index linked, so our suppliers will be looking for cost of CPI driven increases in contract sums. The largest is our waste management contract, and that's index linked to CPI in October. So we're looking at somewhere around 10 or 11% probably increase in that contract cost. And as our largest contract, that's a large sum of inflationary increase as well. At the same time, we're seeing our financing costs increase as well. The cost of borrowing to the council is increasing as the government puts up the base rate, and therefore lending rates or borrowing rates go up as well. We are a net borrower, and a lot of our plans are predicated on future borrowing, so that needs to be factored in terms of that higher cost of borrowing. The government, when it put together its financial settlement for 22-23, indicated that some of the money that we were relying upon in this current year will not continue in 23-24. In fact, New Homes Bonus probably being the largest element of that, which is nearly £800,000, and a couple of smaller grants of, combined of nearly £400,000 actually. Government indicated we couldn't guarantee on seeing those into next year. They contribute themselves to a forecast reduction in government support of nearly just £1.1 million. We don't know, of course, whether the government might revisit that in light of some of the wider pressures that the economy is facing and councils across the country will be dealing with. But we have to assume that the government sticks with the message that it gave us this, at the early part of this year, that those streams of income might disappear in 23-24. There's some other factors that we're aware of that we don't yet know what their impact will be on the budget for next year. The council's staff pension scheme gets revalued every 3 years, called a triannual valuation. That's been done, and we don't know what the impact of that is, but with global uncertainty and stock markets fluctuating right now, there's a risk that we could see another increase in pension contributions that the employer has to make into the pension scheme. Wage inflation will be another factor in that consideration as well. Income streams, the council's gets more money actually from its industrial commercial portfolio than it does from council tax. One thing we do not know, of course, is whether the global and national economic pressures impact upon upon our tenants' ability to continue trading and pay their rents. But we are very dependent upon that rental income stream, so we need that level to ideally grow. What we're worried about, of course, is that they might contract with if there's a business, if their businesses fail, of course. And we also don't know what the current economic crisis, there's danger of overusing that word, might mean on our residents as well and their ability to pay council tax. So that's another consideration that we don't know what this really will mean in terms of collection rate on council tax going into next year. There's an awful lot of issues, as I say, moving around at this current moment in time, all of which have the potential to have a large impact upon what will be a large savings target that the council has to set to balance the budget going into next year. The next stage is to try and quantify some of those values and turn that into a target that we're aiming for. Cabinet and the portfolio holders are acutely aware of the risks and the challenge that they present in terms of developing a budget for next year, and are already working on a series of options that they can use to produce a draft budget in December. That's the realisation is that we can't sit on our hands at this moment in time and wait for certainty to arrive. We need to plan for the worst and hope for the best, really. So members and the cabinet members are already working on a set of solutions. The financial pressures that we're dealing with in the general fund also translate into financial pressures in the housing revenue account as well. So rising inflation is having an impact upon the cost of doing repairs and maintenance, across the cost of new house building. And the government usually sort of rent is pegged to CPI plus 1%. So our rent increases will usually be in line with inflation. The government has already signalled that an 11% based upon current CPI numbers rent increase will be too much to bear for tenants, and is currently consulting on a series of rent caps at either 3%, 5% or 7%. So if our income stream, which funds the housing revenue account, is pegged below inflation, then that limits our ability to meet the cost of inflation in terms of all of the things that are paid for by the housing revenue account. So that's whether that's repairs or whether that's new house building. Both will be impacted by a government rent cap. So by no means is the housing revenue account protected from the same issues that are being experienced in the general fund. And again, in terms of our capital expenditure programme, inflation is pushing up construction costs significantly at the moment. A lot of our materials come from overseas in China. Not only is inflation impacting upon that, we've also seen the recent dive in the pound's value will also be another consideration in terms of exchange rates. So that will make, again, construction materials more expensive than they currently are. Another consideration. There are so many things moving around, it makes it a real challenge, as has already been highlighted, in terms of, one, trying to set the target that we're aiming for, but two, trying to find the solutions to that as well will be challenging if you don't know what you are aiming for. I think that's probably all that I want to say at this moment in time, other than to really highlight to members that it is a particularly challenging budget that we are going into the process of developing for next year, and there will be more challenges along the way. This committee will be kept informed of that development process, and at some point around December or January we'll be presented with the Cabinet's draft budget options paper, which includes a presentation on how Cabinet intend to solve the budget conundrum and present a balanced budget. And members will be asked at that point in time to comment upon the Cabinet's proposed solution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. And I repeat my comments earlier of the work that you're all doing. Any members wish to come in here on this particular report? Councillor Bassett?
Thank you. Yeah, again, I think anyone who's got a sale of crystal balls will be making a fortune at the moment, because it is literally, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The only thing I got a real comment here, the local government settlement is stating there'll be a 2-year one this year. Do we know when we will know what we're going to get to actually give us a bit of certainty in our budgetary for next year?
It's a good question. I think the government's already indicated that the government was planning to review the distribution mechanism for local government support from central government. It's been promised for a number of years. I see today that that there's been a change in the position on that, so we will know that won't happen next year at least. Will we get a 2-year settlement? I'm not sure anymore, and again, the government is dealing with its own set of challenges right now. I think it's unlikely we'll see a 2-year settlement, if I'm honest with you, and probably what we'll see is a continuation or a rollover of existing settlements, whether that means that we still get the same income streams that I've highlighted within the presentation. We don't know. Traditionally, the government gives us the local government finance settlement in December, so probably middle to late December, usually after the comprehensive, the Chancellor's budget in November, really. We will continue to press for certainty sooner so that we can actually build it into our budget plans for next year, but I think we have to recognise that it's most likely we'll get our settlement numbers in December, which is probably after the Cabinet's presented its draft budget proposals. So it represents a major piece of uncertainty that won't be resolved in the time frame that we need it to be resolved within.
Councillor Phillip?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that I completely understand we are working in some degree of vacuum of information. We're hoping that we won't get the latest ever settlement from the government. The latest we've had it was 12 o'clock on Christmas Eve, which makes it a great Christmas present for the finance team. We're really hoping we'll get it earlier than that. We have to make some educated assumptions about what we're going to get. I won't call them guesses, but educated assumptions on what we're going to get. And in some ways, there's not much more determination about that than there is some of the other things that we don't know. So a whole chunk around what we'll be doing this year is planning for the worst and hoping for the best. Time will tell whether our worst is the worst it can get. I mean, if there was, as Mr. Small says, if they had decided to redistribute, one possibility might have been as a relatively affluent area, we'd have got significantly less. And given the size of the hole we already have in our budget for next year, that would have caused us real problems.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Hadley?
I was going to ask Andrew what keeps him awake at night, but it seems like it's everything after reading this depressing report.
If I may, Chair, I was on Friday. I heard in the news that the global stock prices had crashed on the basis of fears around a global recession, and that meant that oil in turn had oil barrel prices had crashed as well. I thought, well, good news. That means that energy prices will will reduce, and we won't see inflation peak at the levels that have been predicted. And then this morning, as you'll have seen, the pound has hit a record low, and of course oil is priced in dollars per barrel, and so that means that every barrel that we buy will cost us a lot more money than it had done previously. So Friday good news, Monday bad news, and it's pretty much the way that the budget's developing this year, if I'm honest with you. There are so many factors at play, it makes it a real challenge to know where to pick a central line.
And then, of course, Monday evening you had Stronger Council, which must be the highlight of your week. So there we go. Councillor Phillip.
I was just going to give a further answer to Councillor Hadley and say it's the thought of the questions that the portfolio holder might ask him next time he's speaking. That's what keeps him awake.
Any other members? Councillor Bassett.
Yeah, obviously just about every council's having the same problems that we're having. I did hear some stories about they're getting together, the councils, to put pressure on the government to come up with some measures to help councils balance their books next year. Well, two parts there. Have you heard any of this? Or if not, what help would you like to see to enable us to progress with some certainty?
An excellent question, really. I mean, local government has a powerful voice. It does, really, and there are mechanisms that it uses to lobby government for extra support. I think we need to recognise that there are many other parts of the public sector also crying out for additional funding in challenging financial circumstances. So we will be one voice in many. But we have a direct route through to the minister, and that minister also has previous experience in looking after local government as well. They will need to be lobbying the Treasury, and the Treasury, as I said, has many competing demands upon it. We face a real financial challenge, but there are other councils that face greater challenges than us. It depends upon your mix of services, and let's not forget that higher tier councils, the councils that provide adults and children's services, have their own massive financial challenges as well that they'll be looking for support for. I think all we can do as a sector is come together and keep making the government understand what that will mean for the sector if extra support isn't forthcoming. Some level, local government's been kind of has always in recent years managed to balance the challenge that's been handed down to it. So that makes us a victim to an extent of our own success, and the government knows that whatever it hands down, local government will deal with that, because that's what we do. We'll find creative solutions to the challenges in front of us. I think there is lobbying going on in government. All the mood music coming back from government at the moment is that there's no more money. So it's a bit of brinkmanship at this moment in time, and we'll have to wait until the final hours to see whether the government councils saying that they can't continue to, they can't balance their budgets, the threat of more Section 114 notices being issued by councils, which is tantamount to a bankruptcy notice by councils, whether the government digs in and finds some extra money at that point in time. But the point is, at this moment, we can't plan for that, really. We can't assume that will be the scenario that manifests, and we have to assume that it's the worst case scenario, which is probably what we're planning for at the moment. And as Councillor Phillip has said, and previously been said, is we have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But we won't know whether the extra money comes down the line probably until the last part of the settlement. Sorry, that was a lengthy answer, but I think that's the reality of the situation.
Thank you. Is there any other members? May I just ask, obviously we take the angle of planning for the worst, which is totally the accurate and right thing to do. Do we have an idea on what the worst case may look like, more so that we can use that as lobbying power to government? Councillor Phillips, say that.
We will have a better view of that over the coming couple of months. The Cabinet is currently working with their lead officers fairly hard on this, that we can actually identify it. When we started looking at this, just to put it in context, our net expenditure in the budget last year was about 15 million. We looked at a gap of about 4 million. So somewhere heading for a 25% gap. it's a huge number. So will it end up that? I really hope it won't, because we're working very hard as a cabinet to make sure that we look at the right things. But I think it's only fair to say to the committee that there will be very difficult decisions that have to be made going forward. It's not a case of things that we would like to do. There are things that we have to do. There are things we have to do that we don't need to do as well or as diligently as we have been doing them. Because in the end, we have to fit in within the budget that we have. The money that's coming in, we can look at things to increase the money coming in. Some of them are doable, some of them are not doable. Most of them won't have a significant impact in the first year, because things to generate more revenue tend to take more than a few months to get going. So that doesn't mean that we won't look at them. We are looking at them. That's partly why we put Qualis in place, because that is a key part of our funding going forward. But again, it all takes time. So how big the problem is, we'll know better over the coming time. But as Mr. Small pointed out, we have somewhat over 8 million coming in from council tax. That is potentially impacted if fewer people can afford to pay the council tax. We've got more than that coming in from our commercial rents. That is impacted if businesses go bust and go bankrupt and can't pay their rents. There are car parking charges. That brings in revenue. But if people aren't travelling to business, they're not using car parks. We have our leisure centres. Unfortunately, when things get really tight, it's often leisure that goes to the wall. And that's a problem for us. We know from our own experiences, I'm sure all of us as councillors know the experiences that we're having currently on our waste contract, and that is one of the biggest expenses that we've got. So we probably aren't planning for the absolute worst, because I think if we did seriously think the absolute worst could happen, neither Mr. Small nor I would actually be sleeping at all, because if our collection rate dropped, say, from the above 96% that we are at the moment to 75%, you lose 2 million. If people start going to the leisure centre and we stop getting money in from there, that might be another million. If we lose 250,000 from car parking, that's another one. So that would then take us up to a hole in our revenues of greater than the amount we take in from council tax at the moment. That's the sort of situation that you suddenly think, that is a problem that we can't solve without being really, really drastic. And I did say, and I will just remind members of this, I did say back when I was bringing forward the budget that we'd allocated 2% with a little bit in the back pocket for our staff salaries, and that was what we would pay for our staff salaries. And that's when you get to the point, if that's the budget, you've got two options. If you go for a bigger rise than that, then we have to have fewer staff, because if the money's not there, we can't pay it. So hopefully that cheers us all up just a little bit.
Thank you very much. It's not a laughing matter, but I think good British humour helps. Any other members? No? If I'm happy to move on to the next item. So that's item 9, which is the Qualis Quarterly Monitoring Report on pages 49 to 60 of your agenda pack. And I believe Andrew will be taking us through that if we don't have remote.
Yeah, I will be taking you through that, Chairman.
Thank you.
So this report presents Qualis's quarter 3, covering the period of, quarter 3 is 1st of April 2022 to 30th of June 2022. So it's the cumulative position up to the end of June. Qualis's financial year ends at the end of September. It's slightly staggered from the council's financial year. So the report is, the board report from Qualis is attached to the report they present to us. And it does show a continuing loss, as has been previously reported. This is primarily associated with the delays in achieving planning consent for the Round Hills development. So Qualis accrues costs in bringing forward that development, and those costs are charged to the Qualis's profit and loss account until such time as they get a planning permission, at which point in time that expenditure turns into added value because it increases the value of their site, and they can transfer that cost onto their balance sheet as work in progress. But until they do that, it just shows as higher expenditure, and that's one of the main reasons for the continuing loss. That position will change at the point they obtain planning permission. The other issue is that Qualis had intended to find suitable regeneration sites across the district, and through acquisition of those, generate more income from commercial properties. They have struggled, I think, to find suitable regeneration properties in the last, well, this year actually, if I'm honest with you. And that's another contributory factor to the current position reported here. Without going through all of the main areas which are flagged in detail in the report, as I say, the position is understood and as expected, really. We await for the planning consent to be achieved, and then the position will look different. It is, of course, worth highlighting at this point in time that the same issues that we've already talked about in relation to the council's financial position also apply equally to Qualis. So Qualis, as a developer, also has to buy construction materials and is seeing large increases in construction material cost. Also, its developments are paid for by borrowing, and we're seeing higher borrowing costs as well. So the uncertainty in the economy is creating uncertainty about future sale prices potentially as well. So that's another factor. So Qualis's business model is being squeezed at the moment. The Qualis one-year business plan is being presented to Overview and Scrutiny Committee tomorrow night, and talks about some of those issues at length. The solution is to re-evaluate all of the development proposals and to be, add in or to flex those in line with new information that's available to them. The one consequence I think that we will see is, of course, that Qualis's business model will be pushed out slightly in terms of the profits that it forecast to develop. And that's a reasonable expectation, I think, in the face of the current economic conditions that prevail at this moment in time. But Qualis is still one of the largest contributors to EFDC in terms of it's paying over £2 million a year in interest costs to the council's budget, and that is a considerable factor in terms of the council continuing to provide the current range of services that it does. So whilst the business model will have to shift slightly, it's entirely due to a set of economic circumstances that, again, could not have been foreseen. But it's not. Qualis is still, as I say, a sizable contributor to the council's overall financial position and is valuable in that regard. I think that's probably all I needed to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any members on the Qualis report? I think it's fair to say Qualis obviously has very similar challenges to, like you say, to the council as a whole. Any particular questions on that report? No, my only question was obviously in light of the challenges that face particularly the construction industry, I just wondered what kind of work might be taking place with things like economies of scale, whether there is any other similar companies that Qualis could work with for greater buying power, being the council being an obvious one. Councillor Phillip?
I think there's a couple of things to say to that. One of that is to make sure that we are still treating Qualis as a separate entity, and we must be careful not to blur those boundaries. Qualis has done a fair amount of procurement to take advantage of buying power. It's also worth saying that the way we set up Qualis allows them to be somewhat more flexible and successful. Some of the danger of similar companies is that they're set up differently, which actually puts more of a risk on them. I think what Qualis is doing, and it's worth saying that I meet with the managing director of Qualis every week, just to make sure that we're tracking along in an aligned way, so that what we're trying to achieve is the best for both sides, acting obviously as the customer for Qualis rather than telling them what to do. So they're aware of the pressures. They have been fairly successful in actually delivering better value contracts than we were getting through the council. So I would be somewhat hesitant at suggesting that they team up with us, because they seem to get a better deal than we do. So maybe we need to team up with them.
Thank you. And I also did wonder, obviously, with the recent stamp duty news, whether that might have a positive impact on elements of Qualis.
That's again one of those ones that crystal balls are a great thing. If you think about where we are in the Qualis construction cycle, as people might have noticed, the Condor building is no more. But there aren't any buildings there to replace it yet. Therefore, it's a bit difficult to sell them and take advantage of the stamp duty. And similarly with St John's, it's not ready yet to be developed. And obviously with Hemnall Street, we can't do Hemnall Street until we do the new sports centre. The new sports centre can't be started until we've got the multi-storey car park in place. So there is that sequence of things that need to be done. It does potentially have an impact on viability, although viability, because of the costs at the moment, is actually going in the opposite direction. It's obviously one of the targets of what the government's done, is to try and improve things like that. So we shall have to wait and see on that one. But we are keeping an eye on it, and I know Qualis and the Qualis board keep an eye on things like that to try and make sure that we're going in the right direction. I suppose it's one of those trade-offs from a Qualis point of view. We would love the purchase price of what they build to be significantly higher, so that Qualis gets more money and it's able to do more. On the other hand, we don't want to price ourselves out of the market, and we don't want residents of the district paying over the odds for what they're getting. So it's I suppose that's a classic catch-22 situation, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other members on this particular item? Okay, well then we'll move on to item 10, which is the dates of our future meetings. Our next meeting, members, at the moment is scheduled for the 25th of October 2022. With that said, thank you to our officers, Vivian, Laura, Becky and Andrew, for being here this evening. Thank you to Councillor Phillip and Councillor Burrows from the Cabinet for also being here this evening. And I'd like to thank members for their contributions to the meeting, and I close the meeting at 8:05. Thank you.